The night is soft, and the world has grown still. Somewhere, far away in memory, England is bathed in twilight. The candle flames of long-dead kings and queens flicker faintly in the distance, and the air itself seems to whisper their stories. You find yourself wandering slowly, as though through a dream. You are neither fully awake nor entirely asleep. Around you, shadows stretch like the pages of a forgotten book, and soon a fortress begins to rise. It is the Tower of London. Its walls are strong, carved of stone that has seen centuries. Its turrets reach upward like watchful guardians of secrets. Some call it a palace, some call it a prison. To others, it is a grave. And tonight, it is the beginning of a tale that has echoed for more than 500 years. A tale of two boys, of a throne, and of a disappearance that shook the kingdom of England. Breathe deeply. The story begins. Long before the princes were born, England was caught in a storm of ambition. Two families, the House of Lancaster with its red rose and the House of York with its white, were locked in a struggle for the crown. It was a war of brothers against brothers, lords against lords, fathers against sons. Kings were made and unmade with frightening swiftness. The crown passed from head to head, while blood spilled across fields and castles. For decades, the land seemed unable to rest, as though cursed to choose and choose again. But from this storm rose Edward of York, later King Edward IV. He was tall and commanding, a warrior who won battles with both sword and charisma. He seized the throne from Henry VI of Lancaster and became king in 1461. For years he held it, then briefly lost it, then reclaimed it again. The people of England had learned to live with uncertainty, but Edward's reign brought them something rare: stability. By the early 1480s, the wars seemed distant. England was breathing again. Merchants thrived, cities bustled, and peace felt almost possible. And then the crown fell into the hands of fate once more. In April of 1483, Edward IV grew suddenly ill. He was only 40, but his body, once so strong, faltered. Perhaps it was the weight of battles past, or the excesses of feasting, or a sickness no one could name. On the 9th of April, he died. The shock rippled through England. People wept in the streets. Courtiers whispered of uncertain days ahead. And all eyes turned to his heir, a boy of 12 years old. The young Edward, Prince of Wales, became King Edward V. Edward V was clever, tall for his age, with a serious mind. Though young, he had been raised to rule. Tutors had filled his days with Latin and law, with tales of kingship and duty. His father had spoken of him with pride, certain he would continue the Yorkist legacy. At his side was his brother, Richard, Duke of York. Only 9 years old, smaller, brighter, more playful. He loved games, stories, and laughter. Where Edward carried the weight of responsibility, Richard carried the spark of joy. The people loved them both. They represented hope, a future where England might escape the endless circle of war. But a crown is heavy, even on the brow of a child, and already forces moved in the shadows. Because Edward V was too young to rule, a protector was appointed. That protector was Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the boy's uncle. Richard was a man of contradictions. To some, he was loyal, brave, a commander who had fought beside his brother Edward. To others, he was ambitious, sharp, and dangerous. He was small in stature, with one shoulder higher than the other, but his presence was anything but weak. Edward IV had trusted him deeply, but trust is fragile, and ambition often grows in silence. The young king was summoned to London for his coronation. He set out from his home in Ludlow, accompanied by his guardians and loyal followers. His uncle Richard rode to meet him, ensuring his protection. At first, the journey seemed normal. Townsfolk cheered as the boy passed, though behind the cheers was an unease. People wondered, would a child truly wear the crown safely? Would his uncle guard him or seize power for himself? Edward's younger brother Richard soon joined him. Together, the princes entered the city, not as free heirs, but as wards of their uncle. And their destination was the Tower. For centuries, the Tower had been more than a prison. It was also a palace. Kings often stayed there before their coronation, preparing for the ceremony. The tower rose beside the Thames, its white walls glowing pale in the moonlight, its thick gates heavy with history. Inside were chambers hung with tapestries, rooms filled with the smells of wax and wood smoke, and courtyards that echoed with footsteps. Here the princes were lodged. But days passed, and no coronation came. Instead, their uncle Richard declared that their father's marriage, Edward IV's union with Elizabeth Woodville, had been invalid. This meant the princes were illegitimate, stripped of their right to rule. And Richard of Gloucester crowned himself king. He was Richard III now. The boys remained in the tower. At first, people saw them at the windows. They were said to play in the gardens, to smile shyly at guards. But as weeks went by, sightings grew fewer. One day, they were seen playing with a set of carved wooden soldiers. Another day, they were seen reading together near a window. And then, nothing. The princes were gone. The tower grew silent, its stones holding their secrets tightly. Some said Richard III had them killed, smothered in their beds by loyal servants. Others whispered that he ordered their bodies buried deep within the tower walls. Still others believed they escaped, spirited away by those who sought to protect them. But no answer ever came. Only silence. Centuries passed. The mystery of the princes in the tower grew into legend. Shakespeare would later write of them, painting Richard III as a villain with a crooked back and a heart full of murder. Ghost stories grew, claiming that on quiet nights within the tower, the sound of children's laughter could still be heard. In 1674, during building works, 2 small skeletons were found beneath a staircase in the tower. They were placed in an urn and interred at Westminster Abbey, believed to be the lost princes. Yet, to this day, no proof confirms it. The question remains, were they victims of ambition or survivors who slipped into myth, living unknown lives beneath the shadow of history? Here, at the edge of the mystery, let us pause. The story of the princes is vast, tangled in rumor and record, history and imagination. To understand it, we must move slowly through the wars that shaped it, the people who lived it, and the myths that linger like candle smoke in the air. So breathe deeply. The tower stands tall in your mind. The river flows quietly beside it. The two boys smile faintly from a window, unaware of the centuries that will wonder about them. Their story is only beginning. The story drifts onward, like a slow river beneath the pale glow of the moon. The Tower of London still stands in your mind, its walls heavy with silence, its chambers lingering in shadow. Yet to understand the fate of the princes, we must turn our gaze to the man who stepped forward when their father died, their uncle, Richard of Gloucester. Close your eyes. Imagine him now. A small figure riding through misty fields, armor polished, his cloak trailing behind him. A man of contradictions, both revered and feared. History remembers him as Richard III.
Richard was born in 1452, in a time when England was already trembling under the Wars of the Roses. He was the youngest son of Richard, Duke of York, who claimed descent from both Edward III and Lionel of Antwerp. His bloodline was strong, his destiny entangled in crowns and battles long before his first breath. As a boy, Richard grew up in a world of shifting loyalties. His father and brother Edmund were killed in battle when Richard was only 8 years old. His eldest brother Edward would later rise as Edward IV, claiming the throne through sword and cunning. Richard grew under Edward's shadow, loyal and steadfast. Unlike his tall, golden-haired brother, Richard was slighter, darker, with one shoulder higher than the other. Chroniclers noted his small stature, some whispering of deformity, though others insist he was simply of unusual build.
Yet what he lacked in size, he made up for in resolve. He became a soldier, skilled in command. He fought at Barnet and Tewkesbury, battles that secured the Yorkist crown. He earned a reputation as a man who did not shrink from danger, who carried himself with determination. But within him, ambition flickered. Perhaps it was loyalty. Perhaps it was hunger. Perhaps it was both. When Edward IV died, Richard stepped forward. His nephew Edward, only 12, was too young to rule. The boy's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, hoped to act as guardian, supported by her powerful Woodville family. But Richard, named protector in Edward IV's will, moved quickly. He intercepted the young king's entourage as Edward traveled toward London. With stern politeness, Richard dismissed many of the boy's protectors and took the child into his own care. To some, it was a rightful act of guardianship. To others, it was the first shadow of usurpation. The journey to London, once a procession of coronation, became a quiet march of uncertainty. The Tower awaited. Even as Edward and his brother Richard settled uneasily within the Tower, their uncle began to act. Whispers spread that their father, Edward IV, had not been lawfully married to their mother, Elizabeth Woodville. A clergyman was said to claim Edward IV had been betrothed to another woman before Elizabeth, making their marriage invalid and their children illegitimate. If true, then young Edward V had no right to the throne. And if Edward had no right, who then should rule? The answer was clear. Richard of Gloucester. On the 26th of June, 1483, Richard declared himself rightful king. Within days, he was crowned as Richard III. And the princes? They remained in the Tower. History has painted Richard III in many shades. To some, he was a schemer, a murderer who stole the crown and silenced the rightful heirs. Shakespeare's plays would later depict him as hunchbacked and malevolent, creeping through shadows with murderous intent. His name would become a byword for treachery. But to others, he was misunderstood. A loyal brother who served Edward IV faithfully, a man who sought stability in a kingdom that often teetered on the edge of chaos. His reign, though brief, showed signs of reform and care for common law. Some chroniclers described him as pious, devoted to governance, and generous to the poor. Which was true? A villain cloaked in ambition, or a protector twisted by rumor? The answer lies lost between myth and fact. Richard III ruled for only 2 years, but in that time his reputation darkened. The princes in the Tower were not seen again after the summer of 1483. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Richard had ordered their deaths. Others claimed he kept them alive but hidden, too dangerous to release. Chroniclers from France, Burgundy, and England began writing of the 2 lost boys, their fate uncertain, but always tied to their uncle's shadow. Richard himself never spoke of them. Not once in record or proclamation did he admit to their deaths or explain their disappearance. The silence became an accusation. And yet, no proof has ever been found. No document, no confession, no order bearing Richard's seal. Only whispers passed down through time. In the centuries that followed, Richard's image was reshaped again and again. In Shakespeare's Richard III, he became the very embodiment of villainy, a crooked-backed tyrant who murdered his nephews for power. In Tudor propaganda, he was the dark foil to Henry VII, whose rise was painted as the triumph of justice over evil. In modern times, historians have questioned these accounts, asking whether Richard was truly guilty or simply condemned by those who had more to gain from his fall. Perhaps the truth was lost in smoke, or perhaps the truth was never written at all. Imagine for a moment Richard alone in the Tower. The halls are silent. The moonlight falls in pale silver across the stone. He walks slowly, his crown heavy upon his brow, his thoughts heavier still. Did he think of his nephews? 2 boys asleep in their chamber, unaware of the centuries that would remember them. Did he believe himself justified, a man securing stability for the realm? Or did he, in secret, carry guilt that gnawed at him through the long nights? No one can say. The stones of the Tower remain silent. And so history leaves us here. 2 princes hidden within the Tower, their laughter fading into silence. A king rising in their place, his shadow growing larger, and a kingdom whispering with suspicion. The night deepens. The river Thames flows endlessly, carrying secrets with its tide. And the Tower of London stands eternal, its stones holding stories that the world still longs to hear.
The Tower of London rises once more in your mind. Its pale stone walls gleam faintly in the moonlight, and the River Thames flows dark and steady beside it, carrying whispers of time. Inside, the air is cool and still. Tapestries hang upon the walls, heavy with embroidered patterns. The floors smell faintly of rushes, straw laid down to soften footsteps. Lanterns flicker with quiet flame. And somewhere in the upper chambers of the tower, two boys live their days. Edward, 12 years old, quiet, thoughtful, carrying the weight of kingship though he does not yet wear the crown. And Richard, his younger brother, only 9, playful, bright, with eyes that sparkle when the sunlight falls through the high windows. This is their world. Not one of swords or crowns, but of hushed corridors, small comforts, and endless waiting. The day begins with the toll of bells. The sound drifts over the tower grounds, echoing across stone walls, blending with the cries of gulls circling the river. Servants bring bread, cheese, and watered wine, sometimes honey, sometimes apples, depending on the season. The princes eat quietly, their voices soft. Edward speaks little, thinking always of the crown that should soon be his. Richard fidgets, tapping his fingers, eager for games. When the meal is done, tutors arrive. Though confined, the princes are still royal children. They are taught Latin phrases, passages of scripture, lessons of law. Edward listens carefully, repeating each word with diligence. Richard listens too, but his thoughts often wander, to the gardens, to the river, to the carved wooden toys that rest on the table nearby. Through the windows, London stirs. The smoke of hearths rises from the city. The chatter of merchants drifts faintly on the wind, and beyond the walls, the world moves on without them.
When the weather is kind, the boys are allowed into the gardens. Imagine them walking slowly through the inner ward, their steps soft against the grass. The white tower rises tall above them, a silent sentinel. Guards stand watch at the gates, their armor glinting, their faces unreadable. Richard, the younger, runs ahead, chasing butterflies, laughing as his cloak flutters behind him. Edward follows, more reserved, his gaze often lifting toward the ravens that circle the battlements. They play chess on a board carried outdoors, carved from oak and ivory. They race along the courtyard paths, their voices momentarily breaking the silence of stone. For a time, they are simply children, and the tower feels less like a prison, more like a playground of shadows and sun. But always, the guards are there. Always, the gates remain closed. Weeks pass. The boys ask, softly, when the coronation will come. They ask when Edward will be crowned, when the great ceremony in Westminster will call him king. But no answers are given. Their tutors smile faintly, their servants bow, and silence falls again. Edward begins to write letters in secret. His handwriting is small, careful, each word chosen with the precision of a boy determined to prove he is ready. He writes of justice, of loyalty, of the hope to rule fairly. He keeps the letters hidden, perhaps never sent. Richard sketches instead. He draws knights with swords, ships with sails, castles with tall towers. Sometimes he draws birds, ravens, doves, and swans. His drawings, if they survived, would have told the story of a child untouched by politics, still free in imagination. As summer deepens, whispers begin to stir in London. Fewer and fewer people claim to see the princes at the windows. Once, they waved shyly at a group of children outside the tower walls. Another time, they were seen standing together, Edward's hand resting on his brother's shoulder. But the sightings grow rare. Guards say nothing. Courtiers ask questions in hushed tones. Rumors slip into taverns and marketplaces that the boys are ill, or that they are kept apart, or that they are gone altogether. The tower, once a palace of preparation, begins to feel like a tomb. Still, within their chambers, the boys find small comforts. At night, they sit by candlelight, telling each other stories. Edward recalls the lessons of old kings, Arthur, Alfred, and Henry. Richard invents tales of dragons and hidden treasure beneath the tower itself. Sometimes they hear footsteps echoing down the halls, sometimes distant voices, but the chambers remain closed, their world reduced to stone walls and whispered dreams. The younger brother leans against the elder, asking softly, "When will we go home?" And the elder replies, "Soon, perhaps, very soon." In later years, stories would spread that the princes had escaped. Some said a secret passage beneath the tower carried them to freedom. Others claimed they were smuggled away in disguise, raised in distant lands where no one knew their true names. There were tales of a boy who lived in Flanders, claiming to be Richard of York, grown older but still carrying the shadow of his lost childhood. He became known as Perkin Warbeck, a pretender to the throne, his claims shaking the Tudor dynasty itself. Were these stories truth, or only the desperate hopes of those who could not bear the thought of innocence silenced? The tower does not answer. It keeps its silence well. When the day ends, the princes retreat to their chamber. Candles burn low, casting warm light across the stone walls. Outside, the city of London settles into night. The river glimmers with reflections of the moon. The sound of oars drifts faintly, carrying barges and boats along the water. The voices of guards echo on the battlements, steady, unchanging. The boys lie side by side, their breathing slow, their dreams unknown. Perhaps they dream of freedom, perhaps of coronation, perhaps of nothing at all, only the gentle hum of childhood sleep. And in the stillness, the tower watches. History remembers battles and crowns, kings and betrayals, but within those walls, for a brief time, the story of the princes was not one of politics or power. It was a story of childhood, lived in the quiet spaces between stone walls. Two brothers, one destined to be king, the other his companion. Both remembered not for what they did, but for what they became, a mystery that endures. So let us pause here, in the silence of the tower at night. Let us hold in our minds the image of two boys asleep, their futures uncertain, their laughter still echoing softly through time. The night deepens, the river flows, and the mystery grows darker still.
The Tower of London stands silent.
The air around its stones is heavy, as though it has been holding its breath for centuries. In its upper chambers, once filled with the laughter of two boys, the silence grows deeper. At first, the princes were seen often, walking in the gardens, looking from the windows, playing with carved wooden toys. Then, less and less, until finally, not at all. It was as if the night itself had swallowed them. Chroniclers of the time wrote of brief glimpses. One summer evening, the boys were seen playing in the courtyard. Another day, they were spotted at a high window, the elder's arm protectively around the younger. And then, the windows were empty. A silence spread. Londoners began to whisper. Had the boys been moved? Were they ill? Were they still alive at all? No proclamations came from the new king, Richard III. No reassurances, no explanations, only silence. And in silence, rumors grow like ivy, climbing higher and higher until they cover all certainty. The first and most enduring suspicion fell upon their uncle, now crowned King Richard III. He had motive. The princes were threats to his throne. Though declared illegitimate, their claim could still rally those loyal to the Yorkist line. Their very existence was dangerous to a man who had seized power. He had opportunity. The boys were in his custody, held within the tower, surrounded by his men. And he had silence. He never once declared their fate. Chroniclers of the time wrote of brief glimpses. Chroniclers in France and Burgundy wrote that Richard ordered their deaths. Shakespeare, writing over a century later, would etch the image in ink. Two innocent boys smothered in their beds by assassins, their uncle the architect of the crime. But history offers no proof. No documents survive, no order signed, no confession made. Richard's guilt lingers as a shadow, but never solidifies into truth. Others whispered another name, Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham. Once a loyal supporter of Richard, Buckingham had power, ambition, and his own claim to the throne through distant royal blood. Some said he acted on Richard's orders. Others believed he acted on his own, eliminating the princes to clear a path for himself. Buckingham's fate was short-lived. He rebelled against Richard, was captured, and executed. Did guilt for the princes drive him to turn? Or was he another player in a larger, darker game? And then there was Henry Tudor, the man who would become Henry VII. From exile, he watched England, waiting for his chance to return. For Henry, the mystery of the princes became useful. If Richard were suspected of their murder, Henry's own claim to the throne appeared brighter, cleaner, more just. Some historians whisper, what if Henry, not Richard, silenced the princes? What if after his victory at Bosworth, he ensured they would never reappear to challenge him? It is only a theory, fragile and uncertain. But in a story built on shadows, it cannot be ignored.
The gentlest of theories is also the most romantic. That the princes escaped, that loyal servants spirited them away through secret passages, disguising them as ordinary children, that they grew up far from the tower, their true names hidden, their bloodline lost to history. Some believe one or both lived into adulthood. The most famous was a man called Perkin Warbeck, who in the 1490s claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. His resemblance to the royal family was striking. His claim shook the Tudor court, and for a time even great nobles believed him. If Warbeck was indeed the younger prince, then the story of murder dissolves, replaced with one of survival. and exile. But the truth was never proven. A quieter possibility lingers, that the princes simply died of illness. The tower was damp, cold, and close. Infections spread easily, and children often succumbed quickly. Perhaps one or both grew ill. Perhaps their deaths were hidden to prevent scandal, to protect the crown from instability. If so, history's greatest mystery might be no more than tragedy in silence. Of all the theories, the story of murder clung most tightly to memory. Chroniclers described two men, James Tyrrell and John Dighton, carrying out the deed. They were said to creep into the boys' chamber as they slept, smother them with pillows, and bury their bodies beneath a staircase in the tower. Centuries later, in 1674, workmen digging beneath the tower stair uncovered two small skeletons. They were placed in an urn at Westminster Abbey, believed by many to be the lost princes. Yet even now, modern science has not confirmed the bones' identity. Were they truly the boys, or simply the remains of others swallowed by the tower's long history? The silence of stone does not answer. Imagine the tower as it was then. Midnight. The torches burn low. Guards pace along the walls, their boots echoing. The river flows, dark and endless. Somewhere in the upper chambers, two beds lie empty. The laughter of children is gone. The air is heavy, as though the stones themselves know what has happened. And yet, nothing is certain. Only silence, only shadows, only the enduring question: what became of the princes? The disappearance of the princes became more than a crime. It became a legend. Their fate was never written, never proven, never confessed, and so they remain suspended in time, forever young, forever missing. The tower keeps its secret. The river carries it onward, and history leans close, listening still for an answer that will not come. Let your breath grow slow. Let your thoughts drift. Imagine the tower at night, its windows dark, its gates closed, its stories locked within. The mystery rests there still, quiet, eternal. The princes have vanished, and the world will never stop searching for them.
The years turned, and England shifted beneath new banners. Richard III's reign was brief, shadowed by whispers of the prince's fate. His crown sat heavy, and though he ruled with determination, the rumors spread like smoke, curling into every corner of the realm. The people murmured of vanished children, of betrayal sealed in stone. And when Henry Tudor marched across the field at Bosworth in 1485, he carried more than his own ambition. He carried the haunting silence of the Tower, a silence that had already condemned Richard in the minds of many. Henry's victory ended the Wars of the Roses, but the mystery of the princes followed him into Westminster. He did not produce the boys, alive or dead. Instead, he allowed the uncertainty to linger, for the doubt served him well. If Richard were guilty, then Henry's own crown gleamed brighter by contrast. If the princes were gone, then no rival could rise in their name. Yet their absence never truly faded. Years later, a strange figure appeared in Europe, claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the lost brothers. He was called Perkin Warbeck, a name that would ripple across courts and kingdoms. His manner was noble, his resemblance uncanny, his knowledge of the Yorkist circle disturbingly precise. To those who longed for the old dynasty, he was hope reborn. To Henry, he was danger wrapped in flesh. For a time, even seasoned nobles wavered. Could it be that the younger prince had escaped? Could the tower's silence hide not a death, but a survival? Rebellions flared, banners were raised, and battles sparked in his name. But in the end, Warbeck was captured, paraded, and unmasked. Henry declared him an impostor, a pretender fashioned by foreign enemies. He was executed in 1499, his body broken, but his legend refused to die. Some still whispered that he was who he claimed to be, that the tower had not devoured both princes after all. The story did not end with Warbeck. Across the years, claimants and rumors would return, each bearing a sliver of possibility, each clouding the truth further. The Tudors, clever in their rule, never allowed the mystery to rest. For as long as Richard remained the villain in England's tale, their own line stood taller. Thus, the disappearance of the princes was not merely a question of history. It was a weapon, sharp and enduring, wielded by those who inherited the throne.
And yet, outside the halls of kings, the story changed its shape. For the common people, the princes became more than lost heirs. They became wandering spirits, symbols of innocence destroyed by power. Stories spread that their laughter still echoed in the tower on certain nights, soft and fleeting, as though the walls themselves remembered. Guards claimed to hear the patter of children's feet where no one walked. Visitors swore they glimpsed two pale figures drifting along corridors, always side by side, forever young. In the reign of Elizabeth I, chroniclers wrote of strange lights flickering in the tower's upper rooms. In the centuries that followed, poets and playwrights wove their own visions, Shakespeare most famously, his Richard III forever stained with blood not proven but deeply believed. And in the long candlelit nights of London, storytellers whispered that the boys had never left, that they lingered still, seeking the crown that was denied them. Centuries passed, kings and queens rose and fell, and still the tower kept its secret. Then, in 1674, during the reign of Charles II, workmen dug beneath a staircase within the fortress. There, buried in the cold earth, they found a wooden box containing two small skeletons. The bones were fragile, incomplete, but to those who unearthed them, they told a story older than the ground itself. Many believed they had found the princes at last. Charles ordered the remains placed in an urn, sealed, and set within Westminster Abbey, where they rest still, beneath the carved stone of kings. But the questions did not end. Modern eyes have turned to those bones with hope of answers. Were they truly the lost heirs of York? Science lingers close to the truth, yet, even with all our knowledge, no certainty has been declared. Some argue the remains belong to children of another time, victims of plague or war. Others insist the tower had at last given up its secret. Still, the silence continues. The urn remains unopened, the truth suspended, the mystery intact.
And so the princes live on, not in flesh, but in memory. They are the soft faces in paintings, the shadows at windows, the questions whispered at night. Their story is retold in histories, in novels, in dreams that slip into the quiet hours before sleep. They have become more than children of York. They are symbols of innocence in a world of ambition, of mystery that defies conclusion, of how history itself can blur into legend. When one walks near the tower on a misted night, when the Thames glimmers dark and the ravens stir upon the walls, one might almost hear them still. Two brothers, bound together by fate, walking hand in hand through corridors unseen. The stones remember them, the river carries their silence, and the world, centuries later, leans closer still, asking the same question with no answer: what became of the princes in the tower? Perhaps they were murdered, their breaths stolen in the dark. Perhaps they lived, their names changed, their bloodlines scattered into obscurity. Perhaps their story has no ending, only endless retelling. Yet in that uncertainty lies their power, for a tale without conclusion never fades. It waits, alive in the telling, as vivid tonight as it was 500 years ago. So close your eyes now. Picture the tower not as it is, but as it was. Picture two boys, their laughter echoing against stone, their shadows long in the torchlight. See how the scene grows hazy, how the image blurs, how the silence fold in. Let the mystery become a dream, one you do not need to solve, one you can simply drift within. The tower is quiet. The princes are missing. The night is long, and the story rests beside you, soft as a lullaby. Sleep now, and let the legend keep its secret, for some mysteries are meant to remain, not as answers, but as whispers in the dark.